Welcome everybody to Floodplain Development Permitting with Confidence. I am Chuck Chase. I am the Outreach Coordinator for the Department of Natural Resources. And with me today is Adele Phillips. She came on about a year ago as floodplain mitigation planner. For some of you who have been around for a while, that's what Mitch had done before this. She's really excellent. She's got good experience in mitigation, and she's been a real asset. Among other things that she's done since she got here, one is to update our model permit, which has been around since like the 80s or something like that. And we've really appreciated the work that she's done. So without any further ado, Adele, take it away.
Thanks for the introduction, Chuck. So at this point in time, Mackenzie is going to put the link to where online you find our model floodplain development permit application into the chat. And I'd like you to click on that link and make sure you've got a copy of the document open on your desktop so that you can follow along. We do have sections of the permit in our PowerPoint, but they might be hard to read. So if you've got a copy open on your desktop, that'll help you follow along and know exactly what the form says. So again, Mackenzie has put a link in the chat to where you can find that form on the Department of Natural Resources Floodplain Management Section website. So we released this last summer in June, and the idea is that it's a generic form that virtually any of our jurisdictions can use to permit development in our floodplain in Nebraska. One item of note is that it doesn't account for cumulative improvement. So if you're a jurisdiction with cumulative improvement regulations, you'll have to tweak the form a little bit to accommodate your needs. Now, why do we need a permit or an application process for development in Nebraska's floodplain? Well, in nearly every county in Nebraska, flooding is reported as the hazard of greatest concern. And so it's a present issue. Regulations have, as a result, been adopted at federal, state, and local levels in order to ensure public safety in these areas, but also to preserve natural floodplain functions. These are the ecosystem services that these areas provide for us in terms of ensuring groundwater quality and quantity, for example, or wildlife habitat and recreation areas for us. The state of Nebraska has two bodies of regulation about which you definitely want to be aware and have access to. And Mackenzie has just put a link in the chat to where you can find the PDF versions of the Nebraska Revised Statutes, Chapter 31, Article 10, as well as the Nebraska Administrative Code, Title 455, Chapter 1. So the revised statutes actually point to, and this existed prior to the NFIP existing, but the Nebraska Revised Statute 31-1019 actually directs us, our local governments, to regulate development in the floodplain. It states that if a local government is provided with sufficient data and maps with which to reasonably locate any portion of the floodplain, it shall be the responsibility of local government to adopt, administer, and enforce floodplain management regulations which meet or exceed the minimum standards. So that means if your community has been mapped, you have an obligation to regulate development in your floodplain, whether or not you choose to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. Now, from this revised statute, then we have, it points you to the minimum standards, which are that second document I mentioned. For those who want to access or want their community members to access federally backed flood insurance, and they want to access hazard mitigation funding, then you'll want to participate in the NFIP program. as a part of your community's agreement to participate in NFIP, you agree to regulate development in your special flood hazard area such that it's reasonably safe from flooding. And this development is managed in accordance with the locally adopted ordinance. And that locally adopted ordinance aligns with those Nebraska minimum standards. So if you're following that local ordinance, you are following the layers of regulations that exist at the state and federal local levels, state and federal levels above the local ordinance. And we say that any development in a special flood hazard area must have written permission to commence. And what is development? The Code of Federal Regulations defines it as any man-made changes to improved or unimproved real estate, including but not limited to buildings or other structures, as well as mining, dredging, filling, grading, paving, excavation, drilling operations, storage of equipment or materials. So there's a whole bevy of things that fall under this definition of development and require a floodplain development permit. So here we have, the previous permit was 1 page and it was pretty open-ended. There wasn't a lot of prescription in terms of how to fill it out and with what information. This form is 2 pages long, but it's much simpler in terms of knowing what information you need to provide because it's just spelled out there. It's check boxes and fill in the blank. So the idea is that by completing this form, all the information a floodplain administrator needs in order to evaluate a proposed development for its compliance with local regulations is right there in front of them. So please know that it looks like it's more work, but it really is, the intent is to simplify the job for the floodplain administrator. We are going to walk through this form section by section in the time that remains. A key thing of note is that the floodplain administrator should only mark in the form on the areas that are noted for official use only. They are highlighted in yellow here. For official use only, in the first page is where you do your kind of clerical items, the date at which it was received, filing numbers, etc. And then down at the bottom of the second page, that's where you put your approval signature once you've been provided adequate information to evaluate the proposed development's compliance with your regulations. You'll sign here, and it becomes, this application becomes a permit to develop. Okay, so moving into the second segment, the first portion, large portion, below that initial for official use only section, this is the basics of location information. Make sure you've got the owner's current contact information there. This address may not be the site of the proposed development. It's the location at which the property owner receives their mail. For structure, this is not just structure, it's where the development is going to occur. Be redundant in your location information in this section. If it is an undeveloped parcel, it likely does not have a U.S. Postal Service address assigned. So you want to make sure you've got the tax assessor's parcel number noted. Or if it's part of a subdivision, make sure you've got the subdivision name, the block and lot numbers present. If it's public land survey system, it's a rural tract of land, put the section, the township, and the range there. But make sure you've got these two filled out if you do not have a structure address at that time. And again, this is the location of the proposed development. Now the applicant, it may be the owner, or it may be a contractor or an engineering and architecture firm, this is the project proponent's contact information. This should be the primary point of contact for the project. Should be the person you contact when you have missing information or need clarification on items. For floodplain administrators, you will be able to, or Mackenzie is going to put 3 links in the chat now to help, that will be websites that you can go to make sure that the contractors, the surveyors, the engineers, or the architect's license is current. Those are, for the contractor's license, you'll want to go to the Department of Labor, and we've got that there, and engineers and architects. There's the Nebraska State Board of Engineers and Architects that have a lookup, and also for surveyors, the Nebraska Board of Examiners and Land Surveyors roster page. One thing about this section is, given the scope of the proposed development, you may require multiple permit applications or multiple owners' signatures or endorsements of the proposal. So if you've got a project, maybe the project proponent is a utility company with a pipeline with multiple stream crossings. They may be conceiving of each of this series of activities at their different stream crossings as one project. But for you, the local jurisdiction, you need to have a permit application for each discrete development area. And that development area is not just the site of the excavation or the grading that's going to occur. It is the site of the staging equipment. It includes whatever access is required to get to that development location. All of that should be one application. And then the next stream crossing is another permit application, because you will have different grading and construction documents for each site. Each of them has separate topographic details. Okay. Sometimes a project may cross jurisdictional boundaries. And in this case, the project proponent will need to provide its permit application to each jurisdiction concurrently. Sometimes you may have land that is in joint ownership. It's up to the jurisdiction to decide how you want the endorsement of those owners represented. You don't need multiple permit applications if you've got multiple property owners on one tract of land, but you will want to know that all parties involved are okay with this development proposal. So that's in the case of joint ownership of a single tract of land. If you've got a project, the development area crosses multiple properties or involves multiple adjacent properties, that can be one permit application, but again, you'll want the information and the endorsement of all potentially impacted property owners. Moving down this first page, this is where we get into the project description. For project information under project type, you'll want to check all types that apply. If you're developing a new residence with a crawl space, then that means the residential will be checked, new construction, and grading will be checked. In the project description or the description of proposed work, make sure that the project proponent really has described what they are doing. How many cubic yards of material will be moved? What are the approximate dimensions of the proposed structure? What's the approximate square footage? If there's phasing to this project, it should be noted that it is a phased project, and this is what will occur in phase 1. This is the body of activities that will occur in phase 2. It's quite often that this area provided for description of work may be too small, and so the project proponent can just provide additional pages with the full scope of description. As the floodplain administrator, you'll want to make sure that what's in words in the project description lines up with what's in pictures in the construction documents. And then moving on to the A, B, C parts of this box, this is regarding cumulative or substantial improvement. Mackenzie is going to put a link to FEMA's P758 guide, the substantial improvement, substantial damage description. This is an NFIP related section where any existing structure that has additions or improvements made to it needs to be evaluated for whether that triggers substantial improvement. If it is a free-form structure and the proposed development would be greater than 50% of the value of that structure, then that constitutes substantial improvement. You can learn more about this within that guidebook. In terms of the cost of improvements, that guidebook outlines which costs may be included and which costs should be excluded. Some notable excluded costs include the cost for a land surveyor, the cost to obtain or prepare plans and specifications, as well as outside improvements like sidewalks, paving the driveway, swimming pools, fences. And also, if this is a code compliance issue and the proposed development is to bring a structure into compliance with health, safety, and sanitary codes, those costs aren't included in this value. Now for the next line, the appraised valuation of the structure, you can use the county assessor's assessed value here. However, if that value is generally lower than what an appraised value would be. So if it's close to that 50% threshold, it may be advantageous for the property owner to hire an appraiser and have the structure appraised and use that value. And of course, they should submit the appraisal documents with their floodplain permit application. All right, and at that, I will switch this over to Chuck.
Cool. Yeah, so like Adele just said, some of your property owners are, you're going to make me pay for an appraisal? Well, no, you can use the free data that's available at the assessor's office if you'd like. If you can bring it in for under 50% of that, I'm fine with that. But if they make a qualm about that, then they can pay for an appraisal if they want to. It's advantageous to them. So let's get right into this. One of the foundations of permitting, and permitting is one of the foundations of the NFIP, but one of the foundations of permitting is the elevation of the floodwaters, or what we would call the base flood elevation, or we, as you can see on the slide, we abbreviate it BFE. So you'll hear us say BFE a lot. And what we're talking about is that base flood elevation, the elevation of the floodwaters when we have a 100-year event. In the examples that are over here on the side of a couple of different maps, you'll see that the top one is of a flood insurance rate map, or a firm flood insurance rate map. The one below it is digital from our Department of Natural Resources interactive map. Now, a firm or a paper map, that's the paper map that you probably have in your office, maybe in a file, maybe just collecting dust on a shelf. Not used very often because our interactive map is just so good, okay? But if you're looking at the firm, you're gonna see these squiggly lines that you can see on this top picture here. And you can see that they have elevations. It looks like 1297 and 1295 there. And if you look at the key, it says these are BFEs. These are base flood elevations. And that's true to an extent, but those are insurance BFEs. Those are used to calculate insurance rates, and they're plus or minus like half a foot. So you can't use those for regulatory purposes, which are what you guys are all concerned about. You're going to have to use, if it's an AE, if it's zone AE, and it has all of these cross sections and stuff like that on it, then you have to use the cross sections, which you can see here labeled inside these hexagons, and then interpolate between two cross sections by using the profiles on the back of the flood insurance study. And that's how you're going to calculate the base flood elevation if you have a zone AE. Now, if you look over, where do I find the BFEs? You can see that I'm starting at the bottom and I'm working my way up, so kind of going backwards, but it works for me. I'm kind of backwards anyway. So if we're looking at an AO zone, this is sheet flooding, so this is coming down kind of an incline, and it's going to say right on the firm, or even right on our interactive map, it's going to say this is an AO zone, 1 foot, AO zone 2 feet, AO zone 2.5 feet, something like that. It's going to tell you right there what the depth of that sheet flooding is. And so the base flood elevation is going to be that elevation plus added to the highest adjacent grade to this development, the highest adjacent grade, which is often referred to as the HAG, highest adjacent grade. So if it's an AO zone, it's going to say right on the firm what the depth of that sheet flooding is. And, if it's an incline like this, they're going to have to add that to the highest adjacent grade, not the lowest adjacent grade, to come up with the base flood elevation for this entire project. Now, if it's an AH zone, ponding, it's going to say right on the flood insurance rate map. It's going to say right on the map. It's going to say this is an AH zone, and the elevation of this ponding in a 100-year event is going to be 1596 or something like that. But it'll say it right on the map. Now, if it's an A zone, and I apologize if that person from Colorado or the couple people that we have from Kansas, if they're on the line right now, but if it's an A zone, then there's not going to be any elevations on the map, but you can make a request. If you're the floodplain administrator, you can make the request to the Department of Natural Resources, and we'll calculate those base flood elevations. And we do it for the whole, section, for that whole square mile. We calculate the base flood elevations in that entire section. So for some of you who are on here who are engineers or working from another company or whatever, and that it's your responsibility to fill this out on the form, you're going to have to go to the floodplain administrator to request that, unless there's already one done. So you can go to our interactive map and you can look at where your project is going to be. And if that section is highlighted in yellow, then there's already a base flood elevation available for that section. You can click on that and pull up. It'll have this window that comes up that says, view the BFE determination, and you click yes, and there it is. You can print it off. You can go ahead and calculate what the base flood elevation is, put it on the form, and turn it in. So you don't need to go to the floodplain administrator if there's already a valid BFE for that section. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. There was one other thing I need to talk about. You don't have to go back to the other slide. But if this is for a subdivision of 5 acres or greater, or more, or 50 lots or greater, then you folks who are working for an engineering company, it requires a site-specific base flood elevation. You have to calculate that. Our BFE determinations aren't going to be good enough for that, and it says it right on the BFE determination. It's also not good enough if you're making some sort of hydraulic structure, like a levee or a dam. You can't use our BFE determinations for an A zone. Your engineers are going to have to do that. All right, next slide. So our interactive map. Yeah, if you go to our website and you scroll down to the bottom, there'll be 6 pictures similar to this. You choose the one that says Floodplain Administration. And then when you go to the bottom of that, you'll see these 6 pictures. Or you can just go right to the link that's there. And I believe that Mackenzie's also putting that link in the chat box. You can go there, you can click this box that says Interactive Maps. There's a bunch of maps there. You just choose the first one, and that is our Floodplain Interactive Map. All right, so flood zones. Let me catch up with where I am. Bing, bing. Okay, so there we've talked about So the reason we talked about all of this is just for this one little section at the bottom of this application. They're going to have to check whether this is an A zone, an AE zone. If it's an AO or AH, they're going to write that in the other box over there. Base flood elevation, that's where they're going to put that in. The required flood protection elevation, typically that's going to be a foot higher than the base flood elevation in Nebraska and in Kansas too. Colorado, I don't know what yours is. But it's going to be a foot higher than the base flood elevation unless they're just doing something like burying cable or drilling a well or just doing some landscaping. You know, then there's not going to be, they're not going to require to build a structure a foot higher because there's no structure involved. Is the property within a floodway? Yes or no? And Nebraska, if it's within a floodway, it can't be for human habitation. And regardless, no matter where you are, if it's in the floodway, it can't cause a rise. Now, there's a link there to a, let me catch up again. Department of Natural Resources published a no-rise analysis procedure and certification template. And so for a lot of you who are here from engineering companies, surveying companies, you might want to go on ahead, McKinsey's posting that there. You might want to pull that up so that you know what's required. Makes it real clear on what you have to do in order to provide that no-rise certification. For you floodplain administrators, if you get a no-rise that's stamped and signed by an engineer, then they're putting their name and word on it, but that doesn't mean that they're perfect either. So if you have any reason to suspect it, you know, if it's a narrow floodplain and they're filling in half of it and they're saying, hey, this isn't going to cause any rise at all, and you're like, that doesn't look right to me, you can send it to DNR and we'll go on ahead, our engineers will go ahead and review the data they've turned into you. We don't expect floodplain administrators to be, I mean, James, you excluded, we don't expect the rest of you to be engineers. So, you know, so you can go ahead and send it to us and we will review that and make sure that all the ducks are in a row and the like, but realize it takes us about 30 days to get that done. Next slide. Structural requirements. So here we've made it to page number 2. So how does a builder comply? How are they intending to comply with your ordinance? Well, you know, are they planning on elevating? Are they planning on doing some kind of flood proofing? They're going to go ahead and check that box there. Also, the next line down, this is where they're committing to give you a post-development elevation certificate. That's required for any structure. Okay, so there's no elevation certificate needed for earthwork or for drilling a well or burying cable or something like that. But if it's for a structure, they're required to give you a post-development elevation certificate. Just an elevation certificate that shows you that they complied with what you told them that they needed to do or what they told you they were going to do, that the bottom floor is in fact a foot higher or that they've flood proofed or the like. What kind of flood proofing? Are they going to be doing dry flood proofing or wet flood proofing? You'll also notice that there's, let's see. If they're going to do wet flood proofing, then they have to have vents on at least 2 sides of this structure. So they obviously they have to have at least 2 vents. And if they're just putting in regular vents, they have to have 1 square inch of net opening for every square foot of floor space. So you can see here where they're asking for the lowest floor elevation, the lowest elevation of any HVAC equipment, which should also be elevated, or they can give you something that shows that this HVAC is not susceptible to flooding, that it's flood proofed in some way. But this is where they're asking about the enclosed area, the number of openings, and the area of those openings. Now, you can find out more about, oh, by the way, if this is an engineered vent, you know, sometimes an engineered vent, you're going to say, hey, this only has 100 square inches of opening, but it's rated for 200 square feet. So make sure that if it's an engineered vent, they give you that engineered certificate that comes with it. so that you know, hey, we've got 5 vents here. They're each rated for 200 square feet. That's 1,000 square feet. This is a 900 square foot structure. You know, we're good, something like that. You'll notice there's a link there that's been posted. This is for all of our technical bulletins. So you'll see that non-residential floodproofing, you want to look at technical bulletin number 3. For openings, you'll want to look at technical bulletin number 1. This link will also give you, we've got access to all sorts of FEMA documents on that link. So go on ahead and utilize our digital desk reference anytime you wish. And so with that, Adele, supporting documents.
All right, thanks, Chuck. So this is where the project proponent signs and certifies that the information they've provided is true and accurate, and it also has this handy list of necessary supporting documents, not all of which will be required on every project, of course. But certainly, this is where they affirm that they have provided you a completed application. And a note to floodplain administrators, if at cursory glance, you can see that this application is incomplete, don't accept the application and take money for it. Just tell them, like, I need these fields filled out. And once you do that, we'll take the application in. But you don't want to be holding on to nominally complete forms for a project proponent. Location map should show where in your jurisdiction this project is proposed, and the site plan is the next next level down, I guess, in terms of specificity of mapping. It should show all structures. It's not just the footprint of the proposed residence. It should be all existing development. It should show the boundaries of the floodplain or the floodway, whatever's applicable. The floodplain administrator's job is not to look at a site plan and look at the interactive map or their firm map and try to figure out where those flood boundaries lie on the site plan. It's the project proponent's responsibility to locate those boundaries on the site plan. Grading plan, obviously, if there's any cut and fill, it should be described. A grading plan is also necessary. If you've got a proposal for an 8H zone, a grading plan should demonstrate how ponding will be addressed in that flood zone. Naturally, if there's a structure, it should have floor plans or construction specifications, and similarly, floodproofing certificate, flood vent specifications. They should provide for the engineered vents, provide that industry documentation that goes with that vent model. NORI certificate for floodway. Pre-construction elevation certificates can be required for new construction. And then, of course, you get the post-construction elevation certificate afterwards. When they sign this, because elevation certificates are necessary for insurance of all new structures in the floodplain, you can indicate as condition of your signed approval on this permit that an elevation certificate is going to be provided by the project proponent. And remember, it's the burden of proof to demonstrate that the proposed development will meet your regulatory requirements is on the project proponent. It's not the floodplain administrator's job to hunt down these resources. The project proponent should provide this information as a comprehensive packet to the floodplain administrator. The last box is where the floodplain administrator signs their approval on the permit application. This is where the application becomes a permit to develop. The signature should not be placed on good faith that the contractor is going to supply you with the less than 1 foot of rise determination, or on good faith that some environmental impact evaluation is going to be provided you. You should have all that documentation up front And then once it's received and been checked for compliance with your regulations, then you can sign. Here in the signature area, there's a notes field, and that's where you can note that the project proponent is going to be providing you with an elevation certificate at the necessary time. And one thing of note, if you're a floodplain administrator with zoning and building permits also in your jurisdiction, the floodplain development permit should be with those permits. You should have all the permits associated with a location or a particular development together. The floodplain development permits and associated documents should not be living elsewhere or not be easily accessible in relation to the other development permits associated. And also know that even if you're responsible for the certain body, compliance with a certain body of regulations, be heads up about other agencies or jurisdictions that might have interest. NRCS might be concerned about conversions or modifications to any existing wetlands. Again, if you are in a jurisdiction that has building and zoning regulations and a permit mechanism, be aware of that permit workflow and that things are happening in order that they need to. If it's a project that requires a Army Corps of Engineers Section 404 permit, they're going to be needing that permit in place before you want to go ahead and sign the local development permit for that project. So while you do not need to know the specific regulations, be aware of these other agencies and jurisdictions that have interest in development that occurs in flood-prone areas. Oops. And with that, I think we can open it up for questions.
We've had a couple of real good ones. John asked us if we would expound a little bit more on human habitation in the floodway. So if you have an AE zone, typically, there are a few places that don't, but maybe like 4 in the entire state. But if you have an AE zone, typically you're going to have a floodway designated. And the reason they designate the floodway isn't so much for the floodway, but for the flood fringe. What they're calculating is if you could fill in both sides, at what point is it going to cause the flood water to rise a foot? By giving you that flood fringe, you know that in those fringes, they can go ahead and they can do development, and it's not going to cause more than an unacceptable rise, more than that 1 foot. So that's cool, but that means that in the floodway itself, it can't cause any rise at all. So that's why we have the no rise certificate. But in Nebraska, we also know that as they're calculating this, they're calculating it by where the main thrust of the waters, by where the main forces that not hydrostatic, but hydrodynamic pressures of the water are going to be. And so we don't want any structures in there for human habitation. Now, obviously, if someone already has a cabin or a house or whatever that's in there, you know, they're grandfathered in that to that extent. But no new development, no new buildings. So if you're permitting construction, you can't permit a structure for human habitation, whether it's a house or a cabin or something along that line. What some people are getting, how some people are getting by is they're going ahead and bringing an RV. They're pouring an RV slab or something like that. And that's acceptable if it's acceptable with you as a floodplain administrator. That's totally your call. It still poses a danger if they're there in a RV or something like that, and the floodwaters come up and they can't get that RV out. But the idea is they can pull that out of there. Now, I think what John's getting at is after a disaster, if one of those structures that was already there before is more than 50% damaged, they can't rebuild it as a structure for human habitation. If it's substantially damaged, they consider that to be a rebuild, and they would have to rebuild it in accordance with your ordinance. And your ordinance says it can't be for human habitation. So John, is that what you were getting at? That we wanted to talk about the substantial damage and not being able to repair homes, cabins, and the like structures for human habitation that are in the floodplain?
Yes, sir. The substantial damage, but also substantial improvements. We had a number
Right.
of folks. So again, I work at NEMA, I work in the recovery section, and we had some folks that wanted to do elevation projects for properties or structures that were in the floodway.
Right.
And this was the process we had to go through to essentially determine if it was even feasible.
Right.
Because we had to determine if it was, number one, if the property had been if the structure had been substantially damaged, and then two, if making the repairs plus elevating the structure would constitute a substantial improvement to that existing structure in the floodway. So
Right.
yes, thank you for giving more information on that.
Yeah, and thank you, John, for clarifying that. Appreciate it. Adele, did you see the question about getting permission from landowners, and is there a specific form, or is just a letter good enough?
I did not catch the question. No, we do not have a specific form. Jurisdictions can decide what is adequate for their own needs in that case.
Gotcha. I guess the question is a little bit more general than that. Is there a specific endorsement document? Yeah, so I guess, is there a specific endorsement documentation? So a letter, statement written and signed by the property owner should be good enough. Is that correct, Adele?
Yeah, I think that's
has something, unless the community has something more specific that they require.
Yeah, we don't have any direction in that area. We have a question from Dave Forrest. How does one address an addition to a pre-existing structure and is not in compliance? I'm guessing, Dave, that the pre-existing structure is not in compliance.
That's right.
So in this case, you can review the proposed addition, and you can refrain from approving that proposal or that application until they are also making forward progress on bringing their existing structure into compliance.
Right. And Dave, yeah, and if this is less than 50%, unfortunately, they're allowed to go on ahead and put an addition onto their structure. They can even, if their original structure has a basement, you know, that's maybe, you know, if their original structure is built at grade, maybe their bottom floor is a foot lower, that would mean their basement's probably 10 foot lower. They can actually put a basement underneath their addition as long as it's not a substantial improvement. I don't particularly like that, but they're allowed to.
So substantial improvement is more than
50%.
More than 50% of the value of the existing structure?
Right.
Okay.
Right. So if this is a pre-firm structure, it was built before your community had its first map. In other words, it was built before your community had any regulation or any map to regulate from. Then that's a pre-existing structure. This would also apply to a house that was built in compliance. In other words, it wasn't in the floodplain when they built it. You had maps and everything like that, but at the time they built it, it wasn't in the floodplain. Then we got better information and the floodplain increased in size. I mean, the floodplain didn't, but our maps more accurately showed where the floodplain was. And now it, you know, it encompasses their house. They can still go ahead and put on an addition as long as they show that that addition is less than 50%, as long as it's not a substantial improvement, they're allowed to do so. There is a, that book that McKinsey has there, that substantial damage, substantial improvement handbook. There is a chart. I want to say that it's in section 4, it might be in section 6. I can't quite remember, I'm sorry. but that chart just really breaks it down. It almost breaks down the entire book in this one chart. And it just says, if this is a pre-firm house and they're building an addition on and it's not a substantial improvement, then this is what's required, that kind of thing. And it's real handy. I'm working out of my basement right now, but in my office, I at least used to have that photocopied and up on my wall. It's just a handy reference, just that one table. You'll see that there's two tables there, by the way. Please notice that the second table is for VE zones and the like. So that the second one is for coastal development. They have different rules there along the coast. We don't have any coast in Nebraska. Don't worry about the second table.
Chuck, Jeff, with the follow-up question.
Yeah.
So if they were to add on to a pre-existing non-conforming structure and they were allowed to, can we make that addition be flood-proofed or flood compliant?
Yeah, you could.
Okay,
That
that was simple.
Yeah, you're not required to, and you should probably have something in your ordinance that requires that then.
Okay,
Okay.
thank
But
you.
yeah, I mean, the floodplain program is a local program. It's your program. There's minimum standards that have to be met because the state has minimum standards and you have to at least meet those. But you can have higher standards like that. You can say, look, we'll let you build something on, but you have to build it in compliance. You can build on an addition, but the addition has to be in compliance with our ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, in the interest of time, we've got 3 minutes left and we've got one more question. Couple housekeeping things. Mackenzie has placed in the chat a link where you can sign up for our floodplain newsletters and training announcements. We are going to continue to hold these virtual trainings in generally 1-hour sections. And we always have a quarterly newsletter come out. The next one will be in January. And it's through the Gov delivery system. That's how we will be primarily announcing the trainings. Or if you follow Facebook or Twitter, we are going to be advertising through there as well. And then our last question is from Tim Zach. He asked, is a floodplain permit required for channel maintenance, such as placing riprap to protect a culvert outlet? And the answer is yes, that would constitute fill. And that's something I didn't note at the beginning of the presentation, is that jurisdictions are subject to their own floodplain development permitting procedure. Any work that a local jurisdiction is doing to, maybe they're repairing or replacing a culvert, maybe they are grading or increasing the elevation of a road or paving that road. If that work occurs in the special flood hazard area, it is subject to a floodplain development permit application. Seth, do you have anything else to add on this one?
That's good. I did want to say that's an easy thing to permit, though. I mean, if someone's doing, if someone wants to pave their half-mile driveway back to their home, up in the section, whatever, they need to have a permit for that. But that's an easy one to permit. So, but yeah, it is required. Thanks, Adele.
And a note on alterations to hydraulic structures. These are things that are conveying water, the bridges, culverts, the engineered drainage ways. Studies need to be done when there's alterations made to those cross sections, because that will change the flow volume and the velocity, and that will have downstream effects, and it could also have upstream effects in the flood hazard area.
Well, our time's up, and I know that they're going to be showing another slide with some of the links and the like, but I did want to address one more thing about, you said maintenance, like putting rock around the culvert. I get a lot of questions about maintenance, like clearing out trees along the ditchway and the like. That's a tough one, and that's kind of totally up to you. Are they just clearing out the trees and with a bulldozer and such like that, I would think they would need a permit. If they're just going on in there and cutting out some dead trees, making the park look pretty along the bike path, I don't think that I would make them get a floodplain development permit for just maintenance in that sense. So it's kind of your call whether you consider that to be maintenance or development. Anyway.
Yeah, I guess the code does reference vegetation removal. So be cautious if somebody asks for permission for vegetation removal. Be clear as to what the actual scope of activity is. And again, the hope maybe vegetation removal seems innocuous, but in some settings that will again increase the flows in a flood hazard areas. Our riparian areas are very instrumental in protecting against flood damage.
Okay, cool. Thank you again. Thank you everybody for taking the time for this meeting.